In 2006, on the campus of the University of Washington, a man in a rubber caveman mask caught 7 crows in a net, put bands on their legs, and let them go. The birds screamed at him. That was expected. What wasn't expected is what happened when he put the mask on years later and walked the same campus. 47 of the 53 crows he passed screamed at him. 7 birds had ever been trapped. Most of the ones dive-bombing him hadn't been alive in 2006.
You know the usual explanation. Crows are clever. Crows have good memories. Both true. Neither one explains this. A memory belongs to the animal that formed it. 7 crows had the experience. 7 crows could remember it. But by then, the mask was being mobbed by dozens of birds across the campus. Birds that had never been trapped, never been handled, never seen that face do anything. Something had reached them, and whatever it was arrived faster than the birds who witnessed it could have flown. So, how does a grudge get to a bird that wasn't there?
Start with why there's a mask in the story at all. The biologist behind this is John Marzluff, and he had an obvious problem. If a crow scolds a particular researcher, you haven't learned much. Birds might be reading his height, his clothing, the way he walks. So the team wore rubber masks. One face, a caveman, was worn only while trapping. A second face, they chose a Dick Cheney mask, was worn by people walking the same routes, bothering nobody. Everything else was held constant. The only thing that changed between a dangerous human and a harmless one was the face. Before any trapping, fewer than 5% of crows scolded the caveman. Afterwards, up to 2/3 did.
And it really is the face they're reading. It didn't matter who was inside the mask. Marzluff's team put it on students and volunteers of different heights, ages, sexes, and builds. The crows didn't care. Same face, same reaction. They tried covering part of the mask with a hat. The birds still scolded. Then they wore it upside down. The crows tilted their heads to look at it the right way up, and scolded anyway. That is not an animal reacting to a strange object. That is an animal recognizing a specific individual and working to confirm the identification before it commits.
Now the part that doesn't fit inside one bird's memory. Marzluff's team tracked the scolding across 5 sites near Seattle for 5 years. It didn't fade. It grew. At one site, the proportion of crows reacting to the caveman climbed from roughly 20% to 60%. The response doubled in frequency. And it traveled, spreading more than a kilometer from the place the trapping had happened. 7 birds were caught. Hundreds ended up scolding. The mask hadn't become more dangerous. It hadn't been near a net in years. The information was moving through the population on its own, arriving in places the original event never touched. It moves 2 ways. The first is sideways. When a crow is trapped, its neighbors gather and mob the trapper. And every bird in that mob is watching a specific face while the alarm goes off around it. They learn the face without ever being caught. The second is downwards. Young crows, born long after the trapping, scold the mask because their parents scold the mask. They inherit an enemy the way they inherit a foraging route. But the 2 kinds of knowledge aren't identical. Crows that were actually trapped could tell the dangerous face from the harmless one more precisely than crows that only learned socially. The copy is real. It's just slightly blurred. Which gives you the answer to the question we started with. The crows mobbing that mask were not remembering him. Most of them had nothing to remember. They were repeating something they had been told. That has a name. When information passes between individuals and down through generations without going through the genes, we call it culture. Not instinct, not memory. A grudge held by a population about a face that most of the population had never encountered. And a culture, once it exists, has a life of its own.
Which is why Marzluff kept walking that route for 17 years. The scolding peaked around 2013. Then it began to slip. Fewer birds each season. Quieter. And in September 2023, he put on the caveman mask, walked the campus, and not one crow said anything. The grudge was gone. Not forgotten by an individual, extinguished from a population. The birds that held it firsthand had died. Their descendants had inherited a warning about a face that never did anything to them. And eventually, as Marzluff put it, it just doesn't pay to keep scolding this guy. A culture had been born, spread, peaked, and gone extinct. And somebody was standing there for all of it.
And that's the part that follows you out of the story. Think about the things you're wary of. Foods, places, situations you avoid without ever having tested them. Try to trace where each one came from. Almost none of them did anything to you. Somebody told you. A parent, a neighbor, a story that circulated. You inherited the warning without the encounter. Exactly like a crow born in 2015 mobbing a mask over a net it never saw. That's not a flaw. It's the cheapest thing culture does. It lets you avoid a danger you were never present for. No animal could survive on first-hand experience alone. But there's a cost, and the crows show that too. The warning outlives the threat. For a decade, those birds screamed at a man who had done nothing to any of them, defending against a net that was never coming back. The information stayed accurate, long after it stopped being true.
So picture the campus in September 2023. A professor in a rubber caveman mask, walking a route he has walked for 17 years. Listening. And nothing. Students going past. Traffic. Crows in the trees, who see a man in a strange mask. And nothing more. Somewhere in that silence is the last bird that ever knew. And it either died or stopped bothering. The grudge was never really about him. It was a piece of information that lived in a population for 17 years, passed from bird to bird, parent to chick, until nobody was left who thought it mattered. Which is a fairly ordinary way for a truth to die.
So, how many of the things you avoid have you actually tested? I'd like to know what you find. Next week, why does a fish dance for the birds that eat it? If you want to know how that one turns out, that video's already up. New impossible things every week.